Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Sarasota and the Lakewood Ranch Unitarian Universalists. I especially welcome our visitors, and we'll have a little more to say about that in a few moments. We're joined in our worship service today by the senior minister, the Reverend Doug Wadkins, who will be preaching the sermon today, and my fellow associate minister, the Reverend Bud Friend Jones, and I'm Beth Miller. And now we have a prelude with some printed announcements, and I'll be back with more words of welcome when that's done. Welcome back. So if you're visiting with us today, if you found us on the internet and would like to learn something more about us, I invite you to cruise around on our website. Up at the top of the homepage, there's a special section for visitors, and if you'll click there, you can learn all kinds of things about the church, and you can also go to the virtual guest book, where you can sign up to receive our newsletter and invitations to the many Zoom activities that we have every week. So please feel free to do that and contact any one of us if you'd like some more information. There's also on that homepage a donate button. And I thank everybody who has been continuing to contribute to our Sunday morning collection on that button, and invite you to do so today if you can. I also want to invite you, if it's Sunday morning and you're watching us live, to come to coffee hour after the service. The link to get into that is part of the Sunday morning link that was sent out yesterday that has the forum and the other things on it. Coffee hour is there. Couple special announcements. You saw on the prelude announcements that the third and so far last scheduled, fourth actually, and last scheduled 8th principal congregational conversation is today at 2 p.m. on Zoom. I invite you to come, whether you've been to other ones or not. Each one is pretty much the same, but We're broken into small groups, and every time the small group is different with a different facilitator and a different conversation about the possibility of including the 8th principle. And more information about what that all means is on our website. One more announcement. The annual meeting will be held on Sunday, March 28th at 11:30 by Zoom. There was a glitch in the announcement that got sent out yesterday on the link. The link wasn't working, and that's going to be corrected today or tomorrow and resent. So don't be too concerned, and you don't need to let us know because we now know, and we will get that fixed right away. Therein ends the announcements.
Good morning. Good morning. The Reverend Suzelle Lynch wrote, "Each time we light the chalice, we renew our commitment to our Unitarian Universalist faith. With the spark of a match, we make it new again, as fresh and surprising as the first day we encountered the spiritual community and realized we were home. We light this chalice in the spirit of the 3rd principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregation. Now, please join us in the opening hymn, number 1028, The Fire of Commitment."
And this is the time in our service where we take a few moments to center ourselves and become fully present in this time with one another. This past Thursday marked the first year's anniversary of the pandemic that shut pretty much everything down throughout much of the world. That Sunday, March 15th last year, we had no church service, a very rare thing for this congregation to not have a church service. And the next 2 Sundays, the then senior minister, Roger Fritz, conducted his last 2 services with us prior to his retirement on video. We didn't get to have the farewell event we had planned and hoped for, and we hope to do that in the future once we're able to be together again. Since then, everything the church has been doing has been virtual, and there's been a lot, and even some new things. But of course, it isn't the same. To mark this extraordinary and sad anniversary, President Biden spoke eloquently and pastorally. I wrote about it in our contact newsletter this week. All kinds of media, both social and public, have commemorated it in very many different ways. Today, the New York Times had quite a thought piece on it. And our Unitarian Universalist president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, sent out a pastoral message to us that's posted on the front page of our website, and I encourage you to go and watch that message. For our contemplation this morning, hear these encouraging words by the Reverend Karen Johnson for our centering reflections, and then that will be followed by silence and singing Spirit of Life. Reverend Johnson writes, "We will get through, not unscathed to be sure. Too much has already been lost. Too many beloveds have been lost. So, not unscathed, but a new kind of whole. The kind that only emerges from the going through it, from the wrestling with it, from the demanding something in exchange for what we lose, making clear what we claim, making clear that we demand in return not personal gain or revenge, but shaped by our loves and our losses, our sorrows and our joys, our failures and our triumphs, a blessing. Shaped by our bodies and minds, by our singing and dancing, by our praying and listening, by the beauty we persist in co-creating, the justice we insist upon, a blessing. Shaped by our dedication to the values that shape us, unremitting compassion, a joyful and radical inclusion, a preferential option for the poor and marginalized, a deep and wide dismantling of white supremacy, honoring the great mystery of life with appreciation and humility, and with a commitment to collective liberation that frees all, a blessing for all." Please join me now in silence.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life and shape of justice. Roots hold me close, winds set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
In 1911, a young woman was having tea with a friend in Lower Manhattan, and the tea party was interrupted by a commotion in the streets. So they went to investigate, and what they discovered was horrifying. They stumbled upon one of the most famous and tragic industrial fires in U.S. history, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And what the young woman witnessed changed her life. What at first she thought were bundles of clothing being tossed from the upper windows were actually, to her horror, human beings that were throwing themselves to their death rather than being burned alive in the factory. You see, it was standard practice in that factory, and actually in most factories in that time, that their stairwells and their exits were locked from the outside. Their reasoning being that workers should not be able to take extra breaks or be able to easily, quote, steal material from where they worked. So this one young woman watched as a young man at the top of the building first kissed his girlfriend and then helped her jump to her death and then threw himself off. When all was said and done, 146 people died in the fire, and most of them were young immigrant women aged 14 to 23. The young woman who witnessed all this was Frances Perkins. She had already begun to do work in labor reform, but this pushed her to a new passion, a new level in her life. It became a deep vocation and calling for her. So much so that she became the Secretary of Labor under Roosevelt in 1933, the first woman cabinet member in history. And she demanded and got from Roosevelt a commitment to support federal initiatives in the areas of unemployment relief and public works, insurance that guarded those who were aging, and also unemployment. She worked to regulate child labor as well as to change and increase wages and decrease the number of hours that adults were allowed to work. All of these became the cornerstones of the New Deal policies for depression relief and reform. And her work brought about in the U.S. the Social Security Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now we hope that not all of the things that inspire our deepest commitments come from such a tragic place. But over and over again, there are important events in our life, and there are commitments that shape us. Now, often we Unitarian Universalists struggle with the word worship, arguing that we do not believe in a God to whom we would offer adoration or obedience. But I remind you that the origin of the word worship comes from two English words that suggest that we are shaping worth in this time. When we come together to worship, we clarify, discover, and recover our sense of commitment to that which is worthy and meaningful in our lives. In words that are attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson, a person will worship something. Have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will out. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. In this month, as we explore the topic of commitments, I invite you to think about your own commitments. Most of us have more commitments than we even know that we have or can certainly attend to well. And so part of the power of religious community is the communal process of clarifying the commitments that we make and seeking to help each of us understand their value and what they really ask of us. And hopefully in some way to help us begin to make more prioritized choices about how we will invest our lives. So as we seek to access this theme more meaningfully, I invite you to take a moment in our interlude to reflect on some of the commitments that come to mind for you today, especially the ones that seem particularly important to you in this time. In just a moment, Reverend Bud will offer a closing reading for this section of the sermon, but first, here are some questions I invite you to think about during the interlude. What are the forces, ideals, relationships, tasks that you feel are of utmost importance to you now? To what are you committed most powerfully now? Perhaps even take a moment to list those things in your mind or jot them down somewhere. Before our interlude, we now move into a reading by Henry Nelson Wyman.
Inevitably, in our lives, we commit ourselves to something, whether worthy or not. The direction and intensity of our loyalties give shape and meaning to our lives. Loyalties, commitments, covenants, the promises we make to one another, these are the things that tell us to what we belong. By doing so, they tell us who we are.
I invite you to return to the things that you thought of as your important components of your life, and certainly your commitments. What I would hope for us to do is, in order to really think more deeply about them, to pull back and think about the most essential and largest of our commitments in life. And from those larger ideas, we can begin to shape our values into various sub-commitments and do them more carefully and thoughtfully so that the realities that we invest in and utilize become a better reflection of the precious resource of our lives. And so there are two big areas that I will invite you to think about. The first is commitment as self-love, self-care, and commitment to the self. In a poem by Laura Mancuso, My Commitment to Myself, she makes some powerful points about how our own inner being is essential to what we bring to the world. She begins her reading, I take care of myself first because I am deserving of exquisite care. I take care of myself to maintain the capacity to help others. I move and I stretch my body every day. I spend time in nature, attuning my senses to the earth's wisdom. I sit with the reality of uncertainty and impermanence and allow it to temper my desire for control. I listen without judgment to others' reactions, which may be different from mine. I forgive myself and others when stress brings out our shadow selves. She then talks about how she also is very aware of being present in the moment and living each moment fully. And towards the end, she says, I seek out with increased sensitivity those who are most vulnerable. If possible, I share my resources with those who need help to survive. I strengthen my connection to my sources of spiritual strength so that I may continue to be replenished. I acknowledge the nearness of death as a key motivator for living a full life. And she ends with a blessing, praying for suffering to cease for all beings, for grief and celebration, for new ways of being. So as we seek to live a meaningful, purposeful, intelligent life, we have a range of commitments. And we are setting up the expectation that one of the essential things is the way that we understand our inner life and what we commit to in our thoughts and our feelings as an essential foundation. There is no way for there to not be a very powerful and dynamic interplay between this inner life and how we understand ourselves, how we treat ourselves, the expectations we place upon ourselves, and what it is that we do in the outer life. And so that naturally brings us to the second major area of commitments, our commitments to community and to each other. This is a quotation from a book. While we want our community, it is often community on our own terms, with easy entrances and exits, lots of choices and support, and minimal responsibilities. So writes Christine Pohl in her book, Living into Community, Cultivating Practices that Sustain Us. She goes on, it would be so much easier if we could connect without being encumbered. Despite the fact that many of us claim to be dissatisfied with individualism, we cherish our capacity to make individual choices and to seek opportunities for personal growth. Communities in which we grow and flourish last over time and are built by people who are faithful to one another and committed to a shared purpose. Community life certainly has moments of incredible beauty and intense personal connection. But how much of it is also daily and ordinary? She concludes, our lives are knit together not so much by intense feelings as by shared history, tasks, commitments, stories, and sacrifice. As we have moved through the one-year anniversary of the beginning of the significant COVID restrictions within our country, we have been living a powerful laboratory of these inner and outer convictions, and how deeply these commitments that we make, both within ourselves and in the larger world, how much they matter. Each of us has had to grapple with some version of our inner workings during this time when most of the world has turned upside down. We have often had to face the power of either or our own isolation and or our connection with significant others, such as partners or family. We've had to navigate new ways of being alone or being together in a manner that we've never had to before. And it changes how we have been with ourselves, what has come up within our inner thoughts, and it certainly has changed how we connect. We each make very powerful choices during this time especially, just to decide whether to go to the grocery store or bank or to walk outside of our door, or for that matter, how much longer we can be in isolation. We carry those heavy decisions day in and day out. As journalist Elliot McLaughlin wrote in his article, 10 Lessons Learned in a Year of COVID Lockdown, he writes, even leaders most vocal on the virtues of masks, distancing, and staying home couldn't help heading to the hair salon or to a Michelin star restaurant. They set terrible examples, but their temptations aren't foreign. So many of us found ourselves wanting an inch or two trimmed off of our hair, or some expertly prepared surf and turf. Still, he goes on, many of us decided we could wait. Super spreader events snared the headlines, but beneath the media spotlight were tens of millions of people giving up the favorite parts of their lives to save others. Not everything was a choice, of course, he continues. Many businesses shut down, hospitals and nursing homes banned visitation, events were canceled and travel banned. But we would be remiss to ignore the accompanying sacrifices that amounted to tiny acts of heroism and doubtlessly saved myriad lives. So as this month we think about the idea of commitment, I turn in the last section of my sermon to some ideas that are offered to us by the poet David Whyte. He talks about the idea of the relationships that we have in our lives and how we commit ourselves to them in the form of a marriage. And he says that we actually have 3 significant marriages in our life. Now, when he uses marriage, he uses it as a way of investing deep meaning in the significant partnerships in which we engage and through which we make commitments. He indicates that we think of marriage as what we do in a significant relationship with another, and it is. But he also states that at least one other significant marriage in our life is work. And he doesn't mean merely the job, although he argues that our jobs make deep connections too, and deep commitments as well, to maintaining our lives and those lives that we love, to finding integrity within the work that is often complex and filled with hard questions. He reminds us that work includes all of the ways, however, that we act, do, and participate in life. So when he talks about the marriage of work, he talks about day in and day out what we do out in the world, whether it's in volunteerism, in our jobs as students, whatever it is that carries us through the day. He writes, work is a constant conversation. It is a back and forth between what I think is me and what I think is not me. It is the edge between what the world needs of me and what I need of the world. Like the person to whom I'm committed in a relationship, work is constantly changing and surprising me by its demands and needs, but also by where it leads me, how much it teaches me, and especially how much tact, patience, and maturity it demands of me. So he believes that we are called in one level of commitment or marriage to commit to other people. That's the one we think of most often. A second marriage, deep commitment in our life and relationship, has to do with the work that we do out in the world. And number 3, he identifies what started this section of the sermon, that it is our ongoing relationship with ourselves, and more specifically, our inner being, that is the third place of deep relationship. And he says that it is the place that can be the most secret of marriages, but often the most telling. And so what he advocates, which may be surprising to some of you, is that we cultivate times of deep quiet with ourselves. He says, in accord with what many traditions, including secular mindfulness, helps us do, to learn how to quiet our mind when we might feel overwhelmed, to learn to be with ourselves and really listen to what it is that the still small voice is saying, to be able, even when we are feeling overwhelmed and lost, to sit with that until we find the calm and the clarity that we need to move forward. As you can see, in this month's theme, there are many meaningful layers. It asks us to think first about the most important components of our lives, our connection with ourselves, our connection with the things that we do in the world, our connections with each other, and start with the big questions and move from that place. So I wonder how you are doing in each of these places as we think together this morning. How is it in your own relationship with your still small voice? Are you able to be comfortable with your own thoughts and in your own quiet, which certainly the pandemic has offered to many of us? What would be necessary for you to be stronger in your commitments to care for yourself and listen to yourself, for it is the foundation of all things that you do? Secondly, what is the work that you are called to do in this time in your life, and how can you prioritize it so that your commitments are sustainable and based in your values? And finally, what are your commitments to your major relationships and to your major communities? How are you doing in the ways that you offer yourself, your time, your affection? What may need to be changed in order for you to feel more in accord with your deepest values? As we prepare to move into the end of this service, may this month, in all of the ways that we explore the questions of that which we commit ourselves to, may each of them give us greater clarity. And from that clarity, a stronger voice for what we want to say and do. And finally, may it help us work as a community to do the important work in the days ahead. May that work bless us all. Amen, and blessed be. I invite you to join us in our closing hymn, hymn 1064, Blue Boat Home.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Our service has ended, and we close with these words by Martha Kirby Capo. She writes, "Our time together is finished, but our work is not done. May our spirits be renewed and our resolve strengthened as we meet the challenges of the week ahead." This chalice flame is extinguished until we ignite it again with the spark of our communion. Have a wonderful week. See you next time.